You are listening to the Coins, Currency, and American History podcast, presented by Littleton Coin Company.
Every great civilization leaves behind its ruins, its art, and its heroes. But the story of America can be told through something smaller, something we can hold in our hands. A coin. Coins are the fingerprints of a nation. This is the story of the United States of America. From colonies to social experiment to global economic leader.
Episode 25, Teddy Roosevelt and the Meaning of Prosperity. At the dawn of the 20th century, America was learning how to make more than ever before. Factories turned out goods on a scale that would have seemed impossible just a generation earlier. Wages climbed in many industries, prices for everyday items fell, and new inventions began showing up in ordinary homes. For the first time, many Americans could afford modern tools and conveniences instead of just reading about them. And all that abundance brought a fresh question into focus. If the country could create so much prosperity, what exactly should that prosperity serve? The question was asked by writers, naturalists, working Americans, and one energetic president who felt a nation needed something more than comfort and commerce. Theodore Roosevelt stepped onto the national stage, drawing from an older American tradition shaped by thinkers like Ralph Waldo Emerson, Henry David Thoreau, and John Muir. They taught that time spent in nature built stronger character and clearer minds, and that the health of a society showed itself in the health of its landscapes. Roosevelt saw consumption as part of life, yet he believed prosperity existed so Americans could have the time and opportunity to explore, to breathe deeply, and to stand before something larger than themselves. Industry made that possible. Conservation gave it purpose. By the early 1900s, factories had changed how Americans worked and lived. They brought new levels of production and mobility. Roosevelt and the transcendental thinkers who influenced him argued the country also needed to open up the natural world so that more people could experience it. Emerson saw nature as a source of truths hard to find in crowded cities. Thoreau found renewal in solitude away from the rush of modern life. Muir described mountains as cathedrals where the spirit could be refreshed. They believed life could not be measured only by output or dollars, and Roosevelt agreed. As a boy, he had dreamt of reveling in and studying nature as a naturalist. It was a dream he never forgot. As a young man, he watched the Transcontinental Railroad transform the West and saw vast herds of buffalo hunted nearly to extinction. So while the nation was rich in land and other natural resources, he knew they were not limitless. They could easily and quickly be wiped out unless steps were taken to preserve them. Of course, Theodore Roosevelt was no isolated dreamer. He understood railroads, tariffs, and the realities of capital. He had studied philosophy in the East, but also hunted, boxed, and ran ranches in the West. So as president, Roosevelt sought to bring balance to the industrial age he inherited and forge a nation that could produce steel and still protect its mountains, build factories, and preserve its rivers, and raise living standards and elevate the quality of daily life while preserving America's natural beauty. Because to him, wilderness was a national resource that could build civic pride as well as physical health. Under Roosevelt, nature became a form of public wealth, a precious commodity to be protected and made available to all U.S. citizens. Serving from 1901 to 1909, Roosevelt used the powers of the presidency to put conservation on solid ground. He expanded forest reserves, created wildlife refuges, and set aside millions of acres. He signed laws that strengthened national parks, and in 1906, the Antiquities Act, which let him proclaim national monuments to protect sites of historic or scientific value. These steps saved open space and time itself from the pressures of unchecked industrial growth. Parks and forests became public goods and held steady even when factories slowed or markets dipped. Their value rested on citizenship rather than quarterly profits. Meanwhile, the United States Mint kept busy at both the main facility in Philadelphia and the branch mints that had opened in earlier decades. Gold coins like Liberty Head double eagles and eagles still circulated, carrying the familiar designs of the day, but Roosevelt found their classic designs lacking. He cared deeply about how America presented itself and admired the high-relief beauty of ancient Greek coins, so he pushed for Renaissance in American coinage. And from that came some of the most beautiful U.S. coins ever struck. Renowned sculptors like Augustus St. Gaudens, Adolph A. Weinman, James Earl Fraser, Herman A. McNeil, and Victor D. Brenner brought masterpieces of art to everyday Americans. Coins like the Lincoln Wheat Cent, the Mercury Dime, the Standing Liberty Quarter, and the Liberty Walking Half Dollar. The Indian Head $2.50 Quarter Eagle, $5 Half Eagle, and $10 Eagle. And perhaps the greatest of them all, the magnificent St. Gaudens $20 Double Eagle, a coin many collectors today regard as one of the most beautiful ever struck by the U.S. Mint. Even as the Mint worked to put works of art into the pockets of American people, Roosevelt worked to bring them leisure and contact with nature. He felt these were the right and inheritance of every citizen, not just the wealthy. With the industrial economy creating more structured time away from work through wages and scheduled hours, national parks and forests would give that time a worthwhile destination. They offered places where people could strengthen their bodies and clear their minds, strengthen their families, and reflect on the nation's larger story. This idea marked an ideological shift. For much of history, extended leisure had belonged mainly to the elite. Now, more and more working Americans also enjoyed it. Access to the great outdoors came in stages. Railroads carried visitors to remote areas. Then the rise of affordable automobiles, like the Model T, opened even more possibilities. Roads improved, lodges appeared, and campgrounds welcomed families. Nature was no longer just protected on paper, it was visited and experienced. And those visits also created new economic activity around services, lodging, and travel. Theodore Roosevelt's ideas about balancing industry and conservation would take root in his own time, but would take decades to fully bear fruit. The broad middle class that would enjoy widespread leisure still lay in the future. After World War I, the Roaring Twenties, the Wall Street crash of 1929, and the Great Depression. However, decades later, 32nd U.S. President Franklin Delano Roosevelt would build upon his distant cousin's vision through the New Deal. And while FDR would not create new parks in the same way, he put people to work building trails, roads, bridges, and facilities that made the lands Teddy protected more accessible and usable for ordinary families. Together, their efforts showed how prosperity could mean both production and preservation. The work of both Roosevelts lives on in America's national park system, and from 2010 to 2021, the United States Mint celebrated that legacy with the National Parks Quarters program. Over the course of 12 years, the Mint issued 56 different quarter designs, one for each state, the District of Columbia, and the 5 United States territories of Puerto Rico, Guam, American Samoa, the U.S. Virgin Islands, and the Northern Mariana Islands. Each design highlights a national park or historic site, bringing the story of American conservation right into the collector's hands. One of the most memorable releases came in 2016, with the quarter honoring Theodore Roosevelt National Park in North Dakota. The reverse shows the president himself on horseback, gazing out over the rugged badlands he once called home. It captures the very landscape that helped shape his philosophy of conservation. The Mint also recognized both Theodore Roosevelt and Franklin D. Roosevelt in its Presidential Dollar Series. Each Roosevelt appears on his own dollar coin, lasting tributes to the two leaders who helped define what public lands and shared prosperity could mean for everyday Americans. As the 20th century dawned, Theodore Roosevelt sought to give the industrial energy of his time deeper meaning. Because he believed true prosperity was measured by the quality of life it made possible, including the chance to experience the nation's natural heritage. He signed legislation establishing 5 national parks, leaving behind a vision of America in which abundance serves as a beginning, not an end, and in which protected lands stands as a public inheritance for every generation of citizens. Next time, in the next episode of Coins, Currency, and American History, the United States steps forth onto the global stage as the nation tests the full reach of its industrial power. Next time, World War I and the emergence of America as a modern economic force. We hope you've enjoyed this episode of the Coins, Currency, and American History podcast presented by Littleton Coin Company. You can find out more about coins and currency in our free Learn Center at www.littletoncoin.com/learn. It's filled with fascinating facts about U.S. coins, world coins, ancient coins, paper money, and more, as well as helpful tips for collectors of all levels. You'll even find free collector guides, checklists, and virtual albums to help you get started and keep track of your growing collection. And while you're there, be sure to check out our online store. Visit www.littletoncoin.com today.